professional counselor in the state of Illinois. Ashourina's primary work experience is with adolescents, teens, although she has worked with adults, children, and groups. During her master's program at NEIU, Ashourina spearheaded research on Assyrian cultural and family histories with faculty professor Dr. Tejada. The research is still in progress at NEIU, with intention of being submitted for publishing once completed. Ashourina is currently taking time away from her career as she has recently become a first-time mom. If you missed her baby, it's one of the cutest babies you've ever seen. She was here before. Ramina Samuel has her Master's of Science in School Counseling. She is a National Certified Counselor and a Licensed Professional Counselor in the state of Illinois. Ramina pursued her degree with an interest to work with the immigrant population to meet their unique needs individually and as a group. With a concentration in school, Ramina has mainly worked with children, adolescents, and young adults. She currently works for District 219's Niles North High School, serving the ELL and general student body. And I have one for Donna too. Donna Shamoun is an LPC who works as a psychotherapist with children and adolescents struggling with a variety of mental health issues such as depression, anxiety, trauma, grief, and more. She also works with women who are currently struggling with eating disorders. She received her bachelor's in psychology from DePaul University and a master's in counseling and psychology at Northwestern University. So, without further ado, Ramina and Ashourina.
Sorry, you're fine. Just to start, we'll be working from like this corner, so everyone okay? Can you hear us from here? Can you see us from here? Okay, sounds good. Yeah, Ramina's going to start the presentation, but we're going to basically start here with just signs, symptoms. What's the difference between stress, depression, anxiety, and other mental health disorders? And just kind of understanding what it means to have one of these things and what persistence is. And then we'll move on to the other half of the presentation. But yeah, I'll let Ramina get started and I'll sit about it.
So as Ashourina mentioned, we would like to shed some light on some common terms and some common conditions that are used within our community and other communities, such as stress, anxiety, and depression, and how they are different and how they can sometimes be confused with each other, so mistaken. Okay. All right, so we're hoping that you will leave this workshop and this presentation with an increased awareness so that you're able to recognize your own symptoms and others' signs and symptoms, so that you seek help, and also you're able to admit and accept, so that you have that necessary help. So students today face enormous amount of stress. Stressors coming at them from all different aspects, if it's family, work, school, maybe abuse, work situation as mentioned, living situations, and most importantly, the social media. So stress is normal. Everyone experiences stress, but stress is caused by external factors, usually happening in our daily lives. And those stressors are usually temporary, so that is something that I want to really emphasize when it comes to stress. It's temporary, it's something that we experience in just daily things. So it comes and it goes, it's not persistent. So as you can see on the slide, stress, it's our body's reaction to any change that requires an adjustment. So some responses can be physical or mental or emotional. So actually in the next slide we will show you some examples, but I wanted to ask if anyone feels comfortable enough or confident enough to maybe give an example of a current stressor and your observation of your response to that stressor. Any volunteers?
I can give an example if it helps kind of like clarify. So when I was a college student, my biggest stressor was school, right? Homework, how am I going to catch up? How am I going to do on this test? How am I going to write this paper? And I would notice that like when we talk about physical is that my traps right here would just get really, really tense and I'd start having this like neck pain. And you're just kind of like, I noticed this with all college students, are always like And that's where I felt my stress. So that's a physical stress. A mental or emotional one would be like having shortness of breath or insomnia, not being able to sleep. So I hope that kind of clarifies the question. No, it's okay.
Alright, no.
Same?
I agree.
Yeah, you got it? Same thing?
Alright. So these are some common effects. As Ashourina mentioned, we sometimes experience them on our body, sometimes it's the mood, sometimes it's just the behavior. So headache, muscle tension as mentioned by Ashourina, some anxiety, lack of motivation, feeling overwhelmed, having that temper, kind of self-medication if you will, and then angry outbursts as mentioned. So these are some examples. Do you have anything to add on that, Ashourina?
No, I think we're
Okay.
good. I think you got it covered.
Alright, so that was stress. For anxiety, however, that's very different than stress. Anxiety doesn't always have a obvious cause to it. So it is internalized. So stress is external, but anxiety is internal. So as a student or individual, you might be able to know that you're having that anxiety, those feelings of anxiety. You're able to realize that it's prolonged and it's excessive, that worry, that fear. But most of the time you're unable to verbalize the cause. So with that in mind, it's really important to know in order to deal with anxiety, it's really significant to work and explore on realizing the why behind that anxiety. So working on knowing that it helps you to really work on managing that anxiety and knowing how to calm those fears. So knowing really the why behind that anxiety, and it's not easy. It takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of whys, right? An example might be, for example, if I would ask Ashourina, like, why are you not taking, let's see, like a exam, or why are you not taking your exam or going to school? And we might think like, oh, she's just avoiding school, but there are other reasons. So once we start asking that why question, she might give us an answer initially, but that once we keep asking the why question more than once, we'll come up to that core reason, right? So that internalized reason. But before going and reviewing these symptoms, anxiety, we overuse that word in our daily lives, even with like our own community. But anxiety is clinically diagnosed. So just because we say, oh, I'm feeling anxious, doesn't mean that we have that clinical anxiety. So it is diagnosed, and there are different types of anxiety, such as generalized, you have, someone might have social anxiety, separation anxiety. It might be in the form of OCD, PTSD, or panic disorder. So these are some examples. But again, I want to emphasize with anxiety, it's really about knowing that it's internal and it's really persistent. The patterns happen more than once. So everyone has bad days, and we may exhibit one or two or more of these listed symptoms, but again, it's about the pattern. If it's happening more than once and consistently, that would raise some red flags, and you would know that there's an underlying anxiety concern. And a lot of times with anxiety, it's comorbid. It comes with other disorders, and that's when I'm gonna move on to depression. I don't know if you have anything else to add with anxiety.
Yeah.
So we're giving like general.
Yeah, so basically she was talking about the why, right? The why is really important because we have to understand what triggers our anxiety. So sometimes you'll be having a great day and your mom will come in and she'll be like, why is your room dirty? And why is this done? And is your homework not done? And it's like, and then you realize you're just having this like moment where you're like, oh my God, what am I gonna do with myself? So that's a trigger. Like, it can come out of nowhere, it can be anything, it could be something simple, and it could be something complex. It could be something as, like I said, as simple as your mom saying something like that to you, or it could be, you know, you had a test, and it triggered this big fear that you're gonna fail, and that's that why, and why goes with triggers. And then, when she's talking about persistence of symptoms, it's imagine feeling most of these symptoms almost every day for 6 months. It's most of the time, most symptoms for 6 months, and that's how you get a generalized anxiety diagnosis. So although we all do feel anxious and anxiety drives us, it's not always a bad thing. Fear is what, anxiety and fear, they're kind of like go hand in hand. Fear is what keeps us from going and trying to touch a bear, right? But when it becomes prolonged and persistent is when it becomes a problem.
Alright, so next slide is about depression. And just like other cultures, this is a word that we overuse. You might have heard the Arabic word for it within your family, ka'aba. We really overuse that, but again, even with depression, just like anxiety, it's clinically diagnosed and it's prolonged. It's if these symptoms are taking their toll for more than 2 weeks, then that's a sign of concern. Okay, even with depression, there are different types. So they're labeled as depressive disorders, but the most one that represents the classic conditions and symptoms is labeled or termed as major depressive disorder. But in our common language, everyday life, we just call everything, you know, someone's depressed, they have depression, but there are different types of depression in different forms. So for symptoms, you know, mood-wise and feelings, you're chronically sad, feeling really hopeless, worthless, helpless. You have a lot of loss of interest in things that in the past you really enjoyed. Fatigue, loss of energy, maybe being in the room, taking a lot of naps, or kind of sleeping but not really having that rest. You're sleeping, you're always in bed, but you're not rested because you're not really sleeping well. Appetite, it might be eating or not eating, and just having suicidal thoughts. Okay, and psychosomatic symptoms, that's just feeling different physical pains. It might not really be real, but you're really feeling that you're like aching, you're in pain. And again, it's about persistence of these symptoms for a prolonged period of time in order for someone to be diagnosed with depression. And Ashourina is actually the clinical counselor, so she has more
You got
experience.
it.
So do you have anything else with depression?
No, you got it, you covered
Okay.
it.
So, initially with all of these slides about stress, anxiety, and depression, obviously there's more to that, there are more layers, but we just want to give the general idea so that we're able to move on with some examples and exercises that we want to work with you today. So that kind of moves me on to Ashourina's turn.
All right. Oh, this was yours.
Oh, that's my apologies. So some other common health disorders or mental health disorders are developmental. So there's autism that we see a lot, and ADHD, so attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, anxiety. We have OCD on there, as I mentioned earlier. Eating disorders, anorexia nervosa or bulimia nervosa. Personality disorders, so borderline personality disorder is an example. Mood disorders, you have bipolar, trauma and stressor-related disorders such as PTSD, and psychotic disorders, which are schizophrenia is an example. Anything else?
Yeah, so as we go through these, they go from more common to least common. So when we say things like this person has PTSD or schizophrenia or is bipolar, we're making a very, very serious comment. It's not something small, it's something very large. It takes multiple assessments, multiple tests to determine if this person is having these things and qualifies for this diagnosis. So that's why it's good to understand that developmental is something that kind of we see in childhood, is somewhat common. OCD, anxiety, pretty common. Eating disorders, a little less common. And as you go down, personality, mood, and psychotic disorders are very rare. So, like I said, we say things like that person's bipolar, but to say someone is bipolar is to say something very large. It's a very significant mood disorder.
And it's also a misconception to think bipolar is just kind of switching between two personalities, because that's different. A personality disorder is different than bipolar. So, we're not covering that today, but just note that difference. These are just some misconceptions in the community.
And if you do have any more questions about these, feel free to relay them on at a later time, because we'd like to answer them. But with our training, a lot of these we can't even diagnose. They would have to get a diagnosis from either a psychiatrist or a psychologist who has more training in this area. And then we could just do therapy with those people. So this is Donna's research. She's not here today, but basically what we're trying to show you is that these are the things common in our communities, because it's important to know, right? So this is Donna's research. She looked at intergenerational trauma in Middle Eastern women. I'm not going to expect you to know what intergenerational trauma is or what relational trauma is, so I'm going to go over that with you. Intergenerational is trauma that's been passed on or experienced by a large group of people. So how many of you know somebody that lost a family member in a war or during diaspora when they had to immigrate over? Quite a few of you, right? Family or a friend, right? It's a lot of us. This is something that is very, very predominant. It's been going on for a long time. So whether you're going back to the Iran-Iraq war, or you're talking about the more recent war, or you're talking about just ISIS coming in there, we know a lot of people who've experienced something like this. And how do we talk about this? How do we pass this on? How do we pass this anxiety on? So I don't know about your mom, but my mom likes to call me every time I leave the house, and she hears an ambulance within 10 to 15 minutes after I leave. And she likes to call and be like, Betsy, are you okay? And I'm like, I'm fine. I heard ambulance. Is it you? I'm like, no. Right? So that's an anxiety that maybe she got because she lost people. She got because she's seen some shitty things, right? But I have it just because she taught me that. That's intergenerational. That's passing it along even though you haven't experienced that trauma. Relational trauma goes hand in hand with that, which is trauma occurring between two people within an interpersonal relationship, whether it's domestic violence or it's just loss, a significant loss, because both parents will experience a child's loss, right? It's two people. It's not just one person. So it's within a relationship. And what Donna's research was looking at is how do we help these women who've experienced this but don't really know how to seek help. They don't know. So some of the other things they found was disruption to attachment style. Does anybody know what attachment is? Have you ever heard of this in Psycho 101? So it's basically the bond between parent and child. How do we learn to love? How do we learn to bond, and how do we pass that on? So if a mom has a child when she's very, very depressed or when she's experiencing domestic violence and she can't bond with that child, right? Now, her daughter or her son grow up and become parents of their own, although they haven't experienced that trauma, pass this attachment style on to the next generation. So I don't know if this makes sense, but intergenerational goes with relational, goes with an attachment style. They're kind of all interlinked. And they get passed on from generation to generation, whether the trauma is experienced or not experienced. So what Donna found was the way to get these women care is to help them shed the shame, that guilt they feel, the stigma, right? How many of you guys have heard from an older generation that therapy or counseling is for crazy people? Anyone seen Girl Interrupted?
Yeah.
Right? One Flew Over Cuckoo's Nest?
Mm-hmm.
A little too old for you, right?
No.
Right. So Like, this is for these crazy, crazy people who can't function in real life. No, that's not it. Honestly, I can't even treat those people. I don't have the experience. So when I do therapy, it's mainly with people who come in there and have stressors and have experienced something that's not that great and are having a hard time coping with it. So it's about helping these women get rid of that. How do we get rid of that stigma? How do we help these people put themselves first, but at the same time not going against culture and tradition? Because culture and tradition have kept them alive, right? It's kept their whole community alive. So basically it's about looking for a balance. Does that make sense? Do I sound like a crazy person right now? So that was Donna's research, and it really makes a lot of sense, right? Like, how do you teach a mom to say, I'm gonna go get help for something that's mental and not expect everybody in her community to be like, what? What's happening? So it's all about, a lot of this is about psychoeducation, as they call it. Teaching a person that this is okay, and caring for yourself means caring for your family. So that was Donna's research, which was pretty amazing when you look at it, right? Hopefully she'll get here sometime and we could see her. Did you know any more about that research that you wanted to add?
No.
Okay. This was my research that we kind of started because I was in one of my family therapy. That was my class. And my teacher was like, use research to back up what you're telling me about your culture. And I said, there isn't any. And she's like, I'm sure there is some. And guess what? You can find it. So she decided, I'm going to do research on your people. I said, all right, well, at least it worked out, right? This research was to look at how the family interacts and how we pass these patterns on from generation to generation. What acculturation looks like for people who don't have a country anymore, people who they're dispersed everywhere, all over the world. And how to increase awareness about this community. And really what we focused in on was the strengths and challenges and what kept us going. What kept these people going, despite the fact that they're dealing with war, they're dealing with genocide, they're dealing with like being away from family, right? How many of you have family that don't live anywhere near here? Australia? All of us, right? Other side of the world. I didn't meet my uncle till like 2 years ago. So this is what they were looking at. And what they found was this closeness, this tight-knit relationships that a lot of other cultures view as a lack of boundaries, saved us. It saved us. That closeness saved us. It kept us going. And they found that the church was a big part of that for a lot of people, and that a lot of our youth had the same interests. Preserve our language. Be open to other cultures while preserving our own, right? We're all here today. So we all went to school, we all have friends that are not Assyrian, but we're all here today trying to preserve who we are in some way. And then, like, staying grounded in our identity despite acculturating. And then another big thing was educating future generations about culture, our culture. How are we going to keep our culture alive? How are we going to tell our children this? How are we going to keep our children marrying other Assyrian people, let's say? These are huge things that we're finding for our first generation Assyrians, because that was a majority of our volunteers. And one of the things that is not listed here but is so important is how do we pass on our trauma narrative? Right? How do we tell one generation what the last generation went through? Now, I didn't find out that my dad and my grandpa were tortured, and my grandpa died shortly after that because of the torture, 2 weeks later, until I was almost 30 years old. So getting that narrative, how do you pass that on? And one of the only things I can suggest is asking. Ask. I know our parents don't want to talk about this. They brush it under the rug. They find ways around it. They just say, oh, your grandpa died. And it's like, okay, wow, how did he die? When did he die? And it's to ask. So the future research is we need more. We need more people. We need people that are not just from Chicago, that are not just first generations, and explore that trauma narrative. How do we pass these stories on? We don't want to lose them. We had 16 volunteers with over 20 pages of stories each, and they all included some form of trauma or loss. But it also included those strengths and challenges, like those strengths, how we kept it all together, how our families stayed together despite being in Australia and in Chicago. How do you describe your relationship with your first cousins? Very, very close. That's how I describe it. I don't know about the rest of you. Even if they're in Australia, even if they're in Arizona. And so these are really important things that we found about not just Middle Eastern people, but Assyrian people. So these are all just preliminary. There's more coming. So how do we help our people? How do we open up this chapter that's kind of painful? And how do we get them to no longer think that this is for crazies? Guess we'll find out. So these are some treatment and coping and resources. And these will answer some of your questions about how to kind of deal with the stuff that gets passed on, right? I have my mom's anxiety. Anybody else? Yeah. So self-care. So it's anything you do that makes you feel really good. Who likes to exercise? Yeah, definitely not. That's not my self-care. But it's yours though. Who likes to cook? Art? Anybody like art? Right, this is all forms of self-care. This is how you care for yourself. You take some time to do something you like so much that you forget to stress about everything else. Like I said, exercise is big for a lot of people, not so much for me. I like to cook, maybe draw a picture, hug people. That's always good. Mindfulness. This is such a hard concept, but it seems so simple, right? Staying in the here and now. Don't think about tomorrow. Don't think about yesterday. Think about right now. Enjoy this exact moment. How do you do that? Well, we're going to teach you, or we're going to try. But it's really helpful. They do this a lot in yoga. They do this a lot in meditation. And it is really, really helpful, and it's about just not worrying about the things you can't control, essentially. Therapy and counseling. Okay. Now, I want to know what you guys kind of think of this. Like, what do you picture? If you could draw a picture of this, what does it look like? Is super Freudian, like is somebody laying on a couch, like hysterical? Yeah, okay. It's not what it is, at all, by any means. One of the greatest things about therapy is that you're establishing a relationship with another human without any judgment, right? This person has your best interest at heart, and this person also can't tell anybody what you talked about. Who wouldn't want a friend like this one? This would be like the best friend ever. So you basically talk to a professional about things that are problematic, whether it's behaviors or it's feelings or it's beliefs or it's relationship issues, which is actually one of the most common topics that comes up in therapy is I'm having a problem with my mom, with my dad, with my boyfriend, with my husband, with my child, whatever it is. And then like looking at how your mind and your body interact. Every time you stress, you put this load on your body, right? Every time you're feeling anxious, you put a load on your body that we don't even notice. We think it's all up here. It's not up here. It's everywhere. And then so who do you see? Does anybody know the difference between these four? Yeah, you know everything. Okay, so a social worker is primarily community-based, right? They look at these communities that need resources and they need support and they try to help them get it. But they don't actually give therapy. They don't have that talk therapy, as they call it, that one-on-one interaction. A psychologist and counselor are the most similar, I'd say. They are both therapists. One has more training. The psychologist has more training. The counselor is on a master's, psychologist is PhD. And they have more assessment, more tools in their hands where they can diagnose things that we were talking about, the psychotic disorder, stuff that we don't know how to do or are not trained to do. So these are the ones we call therapists. Psychiatrists are medical doctors. They'll usually give you some medication in combination with therapy if that's what they're into. If not, they'll work closely with the masters or the PhD. One will give you therapy, one will give you medication. And they have the most training, obviously, because they have to be trained in both. So, do you have any questions about these units? This is what we're doing today. These are just some of the more common approaches we use in therapy, at least me and Ramina and Donna do. Cognitive behavioral therapy, which is the second one down, is the most common and has the most research backing it. But it doesn't work for people like me, who I like to work from a family perspective as well. So even if I'm working with you, I'm going to see how your family affects you and your well-being. I'm not just working with an individual, and this comes from my background, right? Because our families play a huge role in who we are in our culture. Some people, that's not for them. So every therapist has their own toolbox, let's say, of what they use. So today's activity is a strength-based approach. So I think somebody asked a question about being kind to the self. I don't know who that was, but it was up there, about how to care for the self and be kind. And that's just about looking at your strengths as a human being. Because we forget those, right? When we're constantly being put down or challenged or bullied or whatever it may be. Or, like I said, my mom will barge in and be like, why didn't you become a doctor? Because I wasn't going to become a doctor. You're not a doctor, I wasn't going to become one. But it's okay, right? So it's about looking at those strengths, looking at those really good qualities about yourself that you forget to look at. Cognitive behavioral looks at challenging the negative thoughts that we have about ourselves or about our situations or about our lives, and kind of turning them around and also looking at them from a different perspective. Like, have you ever told somebody about this big, horrible thing, and they look at you like, that's not really a big deal? It's about getting to that point. It's about looking at this from a different perspective. Maybe it's not so bad. Will this still bother me 5 years from now? Probably not, right? And then mindfulness, which is what we were talking about, staying in the here and now, doing some yoga. And we're going to do a body scan, which is essentially a type of meditation. So do you guys have these sheets? Okay, Ramina, I need your help, because I'm not tech savvy. Can you open these?
Does anyone need sheets? I can grab you.
The stable one?
I did. That's one sheet. That's one activity. Yeah. And
Is that the one that you want us to work on?
There's
or
two of
which-
them, right?
which sheet?
Yeah, there's two.
Yeah, you're talking about the stable
Everyone
one or
has
the one
two?
with
Oh, whichever one she decides to open, I guess.
Oh, nice. Strengths.
I have a question.
Yeah.
When it comes to being a counselor or a psychologist, if you are in a therapy session with someone and you're seeing symptoms that you can't diagnose, do you recommend that they would go,
You refer. Yeah.
you refer
We
someone?
definitely refer. So if it's something that, usually they come to us with a diagnosis already in hand.
Mhm.
But if we feel like their diagnosis is inaccurate and it's something beyond our scope, so we can diagnose the anxiety disorders, the depressive disorders, the ADHDs and things like that. But when we start getting into psychotic disorders and we feel like psychotic disorders are serious, you guys. Like, people hear things and see things that are not there.
Mhm.
So like, that's something that we're like, let's refer you. Would you mind if I do another assessment with you? Or do you mind if I bring in a colleague to do an assessment with you? And you kind of go from there. It's a really tight-knit community, which is really cool because we really do help each other a lot. That's why it was so easy for me to reach out to Ramina and Donna and get a lot of people involved, because we really do help each other out. But yeah, we always refer. And by that time, you have a good enough relationship with your client that they trust you to do this with them. So, oh, that's the biggest thing about therapy too. Like, I forgot that we didn't add this. I talked about privacy, right? This person can't talk about you unless they think you're in like serious danger or you're gonna put somebody else in serious danger. Other than that, everything is private, it's confidential. But the most important aspect of therapy is that relationship that you're creating with somebody. Yeah.
Can you explain what DBT is and how it's different from CBT?
You know what DBT is? I feel like I know.
That black
Yeah. It's yes. It's a different type, right?
Yes.
But it's very similar. Do you know the different aspects of it? It's not in my toolbox. Yeah, I haven't been trained in DBT either, but I can get some answers for you.
I know they use certain tools and they kind of try to change your focus into something else, and so they actually sometimes have like tools that they use within therapy, just to shift that like focus and thought. So, yeah, but that's something that's getting more common now.
Is it? Okay. See, I'm not in the game anymore. So,
But we're having some technical.
oh, it's technical difficulties. Okay.
So I don't know if
Do you
this
guys have a
helps.
PDF file? Like rather than a link over this?
Is it just the internet?
It's
You wanna-
connected to the
yeah,
internet,
do
it's
you-
just, this thing is just not showing up.
Yeah.
That's so strange. Okay, is it maybe the internet or no?
Should we try to just look it up? No, it's not the internet, because
Okay.
it's connected.
I mean, we don't really need it. We could just look at it if everybody has the strength exploration. You can fill this out. I'm not going to collect it. I'm not going to look at your answers.
Should we search your thing?
Yeah, do what you gotta do. You don't have to do it if you don't want. You can just follow along. You could do it if you feel like it. let's learn to be nice to ourselves. We're nice to everybody else, right? There's also a question here that says about your profession. What's the strengths you possess that help you in your profession? Your profession can be anything. It's not your job. You could be a student. You could be a stay-at-home mom. You could, I don't know, paint the sidewalk. You can hang potato sacks. I don't care. It's about whatever you feel like you do consistently on a regular basis. Like this is what you do with your life. However you describe your profession is up to you. I know we have a lot of students in here. Really well on a profession, so I'd say that's one of my strengths. And so when you move it on to here, it says, how does this strength help you in your relationships or strengths? You can name any things. Well, I mean, who doesn't want to be married to someone who can put themselves in the other person's shoes, right? My husband's a very lucky man. How does it help me in my profession? It helps me a lot. I'd be a really, really bad therapist if I couldn't do this. And then personal fulfillment, right? It does. It feels, this is one of the most amazing jobs, not because it pays well, it doesn't pay well, just letting you guys know right now, if anyone wants to go in this field, it doesn't pay well. But it's very, very fulfilling. To help another person get through these things is very, very rewarding in of itself. Because that person, a lot of times, doesn't ever want to stop therapy because of you. And therapy is like this. You never stop going to see your PCP, right? Your general doctor, you have a physical every year. When you're sick, you might see your doctor for a prolonged period of time, and then when you get better, you see them once a year again. That's how therapy is too. So you have a big problem, you come in, you process, you get what you need, and then you touch base once a year, twice a year, or whenever you really need it. So looking at therapy like you would look at your other doctors is a lot better than looking at it as, I'm gonna get in there, I'm gonna get help, and I'm gonna leave. You have to care for your mind the same way you care for your body. So yeah, personal fulfillment, big time. Does the activity make sense now? Does anybody want to share?
Which part?
Any of it. If somebody wants to give me one of their strengths and how it helps them in any of those other forms, like in your relationships or in your profession, or
I'm optimistic.
you're optimistic. That's amazing. That's an amazing trait to have. And how does it help you in any of those forms, like in your relationships or at your job or?
Usually when people tell me everything's gonna crash and burn, which is most of the time, I just tell them, it's okay, you'll be fine, you know? Try to find a solution.
Amazing. Wow, you'd be really good with mindfulness. Like that. That's awesome. Anybody else? Anybody, we talked about creativity. Anybody creative? Is that one of your traits? Yeah.
Yeah.
But it helps, right? It helps you in a lot of different ways, whether it's, I think it helps teachers a lot. Anybody a teacher here? Oh wow, surprised. Oh no, you guys are young, never mind.
Old enough to be teachers.
Huh?
Old enough to be teachers.
Old enough to be.
Yeah.
It's okay. I was like, I think 30 when I graduated from the master's. You're good. You have time. So this is about being kind to the self, right? Remembering those things that most people forget, right? I'm too busy talking about how I hate my hair, how I need to lose weight, how I should have become a doctor. What did I do to myself? $40,000 a year is just not enough. But being kind means looking at these things that are actually really great about myself that people forget to tell me about. So I have to tell myself. And this is the way, this is a form of self-care. And this is, we use this a lot in therapy, especially with young people. Because it's easy, right? We're talking about those bullies. We're talking about the constant stressors, the teachers telling you you're not good enough, how you're gonna get into college, how you're gonna get into med school, whatever it is, but like, these are the things we have to stop and say, I am intelligent, despite what one test said, because the other 300 were great, right? So this is a strength-based approach. This is what we use in therapy. This is a simplistic version of it, but people who have a really negative self-view, this is really kind of puts them back. It grounds them again. And this is one of my favorite approaches, I'd say. Person-centered, strength-based, and family therapy are my favorites. Maybe Ramina can talk a little bit about her favorites.
Well,
Your favorite approaches to use.
yeah, I've mostly, because I work in schools now, so when I was doing clinical therapy, it was a little different, but now that I'm in school, it's mostly solution focused. And I do try to mostly work with strengths and focusing on here and now. So there's a lot of that. And then the other part is actually cognitive distortions that we actually have the other sheet. I don't think we can pull it up right now, but
They have
kind of decatastrophizing, bringing that big thought that they have down to what the reality is. So being in check of where they are, that the world is not ending, especially for adolescents, for teenagers. Everything is the end of the world. Like if someone fights with them, or they, like Ashourina said, if they failed one test, then they have that thought of, that's it. The world is done. I can't do anything about it. I don't care about school. So kind of reversing that thought, working with those thoughts, and it's an exercise. It takes a lot of practice, and this is why we have that sheet. So if you look at that, it asks about what you are worried about. So starting with a thought, with what is taking that space in your mind that you're thinking about. And then asking you, how likely is that worry will come true, or that bad thing that's taking your mind and taking that time from you, how much of that is going to happen if it's true. Okay, so this, you can give examples like mentioned from past experiences, or maybe something that you're experiencing now.
How many of you had like a major explosive moment when you were about to fail a class, or you thought you were going to fail a class? Yeah, me all the time, every semester, at least one. And that's when you look at it, right? Like give example of past experiences. Like how likely was that to actually happen? Were you getting a C and you thought you were going to fail? Were you getting a B and you thought you were going to fail? And then if it's like an actual F, right? You're actually failing, or you're on the cusp of a D and an F, and you actually think you're going to fail. What's the worst that could happen if you fail your class? You have to retake it?
Yeah.
You have to pay for it again? Kind of sucks. Is it going to matter a year from now? No. Is it going to matter after you graduate? Is it going to matter anytime after those few months? No. And that's kind of like, that's about changing your thought on the specific thing. That's my favorite one. It's like, in 1 week, is it going to matter? Probably, yeah. In a month, probably, yeah. In a year, probably not. In 5 years, definitely not.
So a lot of times it's normal to have irrational thoughts, but if it's happening more often than it should, then it becomes really harmful, and that's when you have to, through therapy or through your own methods of self-care, try to like change that process in your mind.
I also learned something new about like this like CBT, this cognitive behavioral therapy, is to give yourself time to worry. It's like an allotted time to worry. Give yourself 30 minutes every morning to worry. Do not do this at night. You want to sleep after. Give yourself 30 minutes to worry about all the things you're worrying about. Catastrophize them as much as you want. Think about all the ways they could ruin your life, and then after 30 minutes, get up and leave the house and go do what you need to do. Because it doesn't change. That worry doesn't change. You're doing all that you can, right? So, we're gonna try the body scan. Is that what we're trying now? So, anybody done meditation before? I love meditation. I get to be quiet. Nobody talks to me, and it's like really nice. But some people think it's a little bit weird. So basically, you're gonna sit in these seats. You're gonna close your eyes. You're gonna rest your body as like much as you can. Feet grounded, arms on your armrests. And this guy, who I think is English, will tell you how to do this because I can't. Start. Don't drive while doing this or do anything else. He'll tell you that too.
Hello and welcome. This is Greg DeVries from meditationcoach.com. The following meditation should not be used while driving, operating any type of machinery, or caring for young children. The following meditation is called a body scan meditation, which is a form of mindfulness meditation. It can help you become more familiar with your body learn to work effectively with body sensations and feelings of discomfort, stress, and pain. It also will help you to cultivate your powers of concentration. The key to using this meditation effectively is to simply notice what is present in the current moment. Sensations, moods, thoughts, and feelings will arise and fall. Just simply notice without the need to attach. As you go through the practice, try to focus clearly on each area of the body, noticing whatever feelings or sensations arise. If at any time during the meditation you find that you've become distracted, lost in thought, focused on a memory or something that needs to be done, simply let go of that distraction and return your full and complete attention to the meditation where you left off. Now let's begin. Sit in a comfortable meditation posture and gently allow your eyes to close. Become aware of your body. Begin to notice the feeling of the weight and density of your body as you sit in the chair or sit on the floor. And then bring your attention to the natural flow of your breath. Notice that as you inhale, your stomach gently arises. And as you exhale, your stomach gently contracts. This type of breathing is completely effortless. Notice the effortlessness of diaphragmatic breathing. And now I'd like you to follow the full path of the breath. Feel the breath as it enters through your nostrils, crosses your palate to the back of your throat. Feel your lungs expand and then feel your stomach rise. Notice the slight pause between the inhale and the exhale. And then follow the breath on the exhale. Simply noticing, simply paying attention. If thoughts come into your mind, simply refocus on the breath. And now gently bring your attention to the very top of your head, the crown chakra. Notice any sensations you feel at the very top of your head. Not trying to change or fix or alter your body in any way. Just become aware. Then slowly move your attention down to your forehead. Again, noticing any sensations or feelings. Then become aware of the eyes, the cheeks, your jaw and tongue. Then become aware of the throat and the neck. And now bring your attention gently to the shoulders. Noticing any feelings that arise. Then move your attention to the arms, the hands, and then finally the fingers. Just noticing any sensations, any feelings. And now gently bring your awareness to the front of the body, to the chest, rib cage.
That's my fault. The bye bye baby. Sorry guys.
The lungs and the abdomen. You may begin to sense your own heartbeat. You may begin to notice the rise and fall of each breath. And now gently shift your attention to the back of the body. Notice the feeling of your spine. Move your awareness to your shoulder blades. Your middle back. And then finally the lumbar region of the lower back. Again, noticing any sensations that arise. Just feeling your own body. And now gently move your attention to your seat. Your waist and hips. The pelvis. And then slowly move your attention to your legs, your thighs, your hamstrings, and down to your knees. And slowly bring your attention to your calves and shins. Again, noticing any sensations that may arise. Move your attention now down to your feet. The arches, the heels, the balls of the feet. Notice the feeling of your feet as they touch the floor. And then bring your attention to the toes, noticing any sensations that may arise. Notice any tingling or the temperature of the toes. And then finally bring attention to the entire body as a whole system. Try to become fully present with your entire body. As you become fully present with your entire body, allow yourself to feel completely relaxed. Yet maintain your full attention to the present moment. When you feel ready, slowly begin to wiggle your fingers and toes, And then gently allow your eyes to open, trying to maintain this feeling of being fully connected to the present moment.
I'll give you guys a couple seconds to wake up. Was that really weird for anybody? Yeah.
So I know we're not in the best setting for this, but this is merely to like expose you to an example. There are so many different types. One might work for you, one might not. So just try it. There are some good examples without ads.
Without
Sorry
exactly.
about that. But you know that you can try on your own, and it's a whole different experience when you're comfortable and you're fully present and trying this. And I know it's hard to be grounded, so you know, like sitting down, making sure that your feet are fully on the ground and just being there. So I know it's hard. There's a lot of us here, and maybe this is something new that you haven't tried on. We have some interruptions, but this is just one way of
Yeah.
self-care.
Yeah, there's a lot of different types of meditation. There's a lot of different ways to stay in the here and now. This is just one that I added in there, which is one of my favorites. Did anybody notice anything like happening while they were doing this? I feel tingly.
I noticed like when he was saying like to focus on certain parts, that I'm noticing that those certain parts are tense. Like
They're in pain, right?
you have to realize to relax.
Yeah, you notice that you're in pain when you get to those spots. My thing is like, they'll say like the crown of your head, and then I'll start to feel tingling on my head. And there's a science behind this. This isn't just like some guy made this up. Like when you're taking in deep breaths and you're thinking about a certain body part, what you're doing is essentially pushing oxygenated blood to those parts. Those parts that probably get a lot of abuse, right? Like we're talking about your shoulders, we're talking about your lower back, your knees. So there is something to this. This is something that I suggest doing in a more comfortable setting. That's why yoga makes sense, or at home by yourself. If you're one of those people, that's the kind of person that I am. But they really do help, and Emily's actually going to send you different types of meditations that we're going to give you that worksheet to have in your email. There's another one called cognitive distortions. So we're talking about like that catastrophizing, right? Making something like this, catastrophizing, like this is going to ruin my life, or I should have, or I could have, or why didn't I do it this way? It's all about like, these are called cognitive distortions. There are a lot of different ones. Let me see if I can, or jumping to conclusions. Does anybody do that? Like, if I go here, I'm gonna feel socially awkward, and my whole night is gonna be ruined, and I don't wanna go to this party anymore, because, you know, I'm socially awkward. But, so that's one of them. Fortune telling, like, I know this is gonna happen, and so it's like, these are all things that we do, but don't realize are actually an issue, right? We don't realize that this is actually cognitively incorrect. It's something that's making it harder for us to like just kind of cope every day, day to day. So Emily will send you those. She'll send you the mindfulness techniques that you could do at home. YouTube has like a million of these. Some of them are hours long. For those of you who can stay focused for that long, 10 minutes is like my max, maybe 15.
And there are different apps if you're more someone who's into tech. There are different apps that is that in the same document that you're sharing online?
That's
or
in
is
a
it
different
presentation?
document. So Ramina
Okay.
put this support and resources document together, right? So it'll tell you where you could like get like access to a lot of different mental health help, including the apps, which I think we're gonna kind of go over in a little bit. But can you click next? Oh, I have it. I don't see it. Here? Oh,
Yeah.
thanks. So, yeah, so it is weird. It's always weird the first time. It's probably weird the first 5 times, and then you start getting into it, and you're like, oh, wow, I've been missing this? How have I been missing this? So this is what we were talking about, was resources and support. Before the Q&A, I'll have you guys take a break, get some coffee, some water, whatever else you need, but we'll finish this up. So resources, a lot of people have questions about, like, how do we get access to mental health care? it's supposed to be really expensive, right? You hear about doc fees being like anywhere from $50 to $150 an hour. But it's not really like that. Most insurances cover mental health care, especially now. So you qualify. And if you don't have health care and you don't make a lot of money, a lot of places have sliding scale fees. Do you know what these are? You show them a pay stub and they'll make you pay $5 a session or $10 a session depending on how much you make. And if you make zero, it's the lowest possible amount, which I think is about $5. And there's also agencies specific to a person's needs, right? So like students actually have free access to a lot of these things. College campuses have counselors, they have therapists, and you can just go and they're included in all the tuition money you're paying. So, and then there's support groups which are also free. And support groups can be online, they can be in person, and they're also for specific people. If you have a substance abuse issue, there's anxiety groups, there's depression groups, there's postpartum depression groups if you're a mom. There's a lot of different support out there, and there's also online therapy now. This is something new. That wasn't HIPAA compliant before, which is like privacy policy, but it's getting there, and it makes it affordable and easily accessible for people everywhere, and it gives therapists a job, especially people who are like multilingual, where you can get access to that, where we didn't have that before. Another thing I think is really important to dip into is support systems. Anybody have a really, really good friend that they can tell anything to and you know you won't be judged? That is a support system. Your family could be a support system, your peers, other therapists for me are a support system, other moms are a support system. And so it's about learning who you can kind of put in your corner. There are people that make it harder, but you can't get rid of, right? Your parents, your siblings, whoever that may be. But there's people who are really, really helpful in your life, and it's about utilizing that support and being appreciative of that support, because it is always really there. And then one of the big things we have is like, how do you talk to something serious or something that's really bothering you with these people in your support system? Primarily your parents, I think, is the biggest question we get asked. And I don't know if this link works, but we can try it. Yeah, I'll have Ramina give it a try. But really, like, we ask, what is the biggest concern about telling your parents that you need help, or you want therapy, or you're seeking therapy? Does anybody have concerns like that? No? So these are some of the questions that came up. I don't know how my parents will react. Like I said, a lot of them will be like, that's for crazy people, you're not crazy, right? And this will also be sent to you, but it's about how to address these things. They'll be disappointed or sad, or they'll worry even more. But for the most part, when you talk to a parent about these things, they really want to help more than they want to harm. I think another one was, they'll have too many questions, so answer them. Answer them, and it doesn't have to be this big, explosive, like, you're so dumb you don't know anything about life. No, this is really what it is, and it's really not a big deal, and you know, I need your support. This is a good one. One or both of my parents are part of where I'm struggling. If it's one, go to the other. If it's both, go to your support system. You have a great professor, teacher, best friend, and talk to them and say, what do you think? Most of the time, you'll get the support that you want, even though you think you won't, is what I've noticed, as long as you're open. But answer those questions, right? Your parents don't know. A lot of our parents don't know. They just don't know. So when they ask you something like, isn't this for crazy people? You say, no, it's actually for everyday people who are just stressed. We have more stressors than you did. Our biggest concern wasn't just getting married and having kids. We go to school, we work. We also have to find a way to have a social life while being sane, which is kind of hard.
And we have social media.
Social media, oh my goodness. I don't know how you guys do it. My parents do not believe me. I don't know how that one works, but this is like a really, really good document on how to like approach your parents about needing help or wanting to get help. And honestly, I think most of you don't even have to tell your parents if you don't want. Because of HIPAA, as long as you're over like 13, you have access to mental health help, and nobody's going to know what you talk about in there. So we'll send you this document as well. Are there any other concerns, like, that you guys have in terms of, like, having to access therapy?
Or maybe questions we have not answered.
I have a question
Yeah.
about the research, like yours and Donna's or whatever. Are those like online somewhere that we can?
So I have I think I sent it to Emily once, but I can send it out. It's just a PowerPoint, so it's preliminary. We're still working, we're still sifting through data. Like I said, over 20 pages of stories. We're looking at stories. It's qualitative data. Does anybody know the difference? Quantitative will get you numbers and statistics. Qualitative will get you basically a story. So we're looking at 20 pages of story, so it's still in the process. Right now I'm no longer on the project because I graduated, so it's other people working on it, including Dr. Tejada, which is faculty. So that, I don't know about Donna's, but maybe. I don't know if it was research that she did that never got published or not, but that happens a lot, by the way. We do a lot of research while we're in school, in graduate school, that never gets published. It kind of just stays there. So, but we'll ask her, and I can send you that PowerPoint if you want to know some more information. Yes?
I know a lot of disorders you have to meet like X amount of characteristics to qualify for that disorder.
Yes.
Is it the same with depression, or do you have to fulfill all of them?
I think it's most. So
Most?
I think they'll tell you, I think there's like 10 for major depressive disorder. What is it, like 10 or 11? I think you have to meet like 7. There's a huge diagnostic manual
Mm.
that'll tell you like you have to meet 7 out of the 10 excluding this one, or it has to include this one, right? Like number 1, which is usually depressive symptoms, let's say.
So
And then
we-
it'll be for a duration of time. So every disorder, including depression, has that kind of criteria.
Yeah, we usually go by that manual. In our master's program, we were trained, but as Ashourina mentioned earlier, not everyone will diagnose, but we learn how to diagnose. And it's called DSM. It's like a thick book with all the disorders, and it gets updated every now and then.
Yeah, every few years or so. It's called the Diagnostic Statistical Manual or something
Yes.
like that. 5. We're on
On
edition
five,
5 right now. So yeah, I think it's like 7 out of the 10 or 11 for major depressive disorder, and they have to be persistent every single day for at least 2 weeks before you get the diagnosis. We do have a Q&A after this, so I think maybe we should take a little bit of a break. Does anybody want to grab coffee, water, use the restroom, eat some brownies, because that's what I'm gonna do. Let's start with the first one, which I feel like So do you guys feel like, what are the steps to being kinder and calmer to yourself? Do you feel like we've covered that? For the most part?
Yeah.
Okay. How do you manage depression, anxiety while at college, staying motivated, maintaining grades? Is that covered or not quite so clear?
Or if you have like some ideas or tips
Just
that
share
you-
with each other some,
Yeah.
maybe some tips that actually help you?
Like you fail, take the class again and
Just-
get
yeah.
enough sleep.
Let's see, you learned something.
Yeah, I actually failed a class at UIC because that's where I went for undergrad, and it was chemistry. It was my second year, and yeah, at that time it was the end of the world, but here I am.
Yeah, look at her now. And also like remembering self-care, right? There's a lot of time to do homework. You're gonna be doing homework for a really, really long time. Take a break. Go see people that you love. Let yourself be happy for a little while.
Yeah, and don't pull all-nighters.
Yeah.
You really need to
Lack of
sleep.
sleep will kill you.
It's one of the most highly related thing to anxiety and depression is like a lack of sleep, including postpartum depression. That's why so many women have like the baby blues, because you're not sleeping. And so like they'll start sleeping and like, oh, I feel great now. Makes sense, right?
How do you maintain recovery from mental illness?
I think we talked a little bit about this, but treat it like you treat your regular doctor. Seek your help when you're in a crisis or in a situation that you really need help with, and maintain it. If you feel like you graduated, right? You kind of graduate, but you want to touch base every once in a while, it's okay. Your therapist will be there for you. That relationship is as long as you want it to last. So whenever you feel like you're getting kind of sucked into that vortex again, touch base. Give your therapist a call. Go back to cooking, to drawing, to swimming, to whatever it is that really makes you feel good. Don't think that this is short term. Just like you care for your body, care for your mind.
Something we didn't maybe cover earlier on is that a lot of times different individuals will try therapy for the first time and then they're just kind of shocked that it's not a fit and it's not working for them. It will take more than once. Different therapists are different. You just need to find what works for you. So don't give up on that. Sometimes it'll take more than one try.
And look for a therapist who is open, willing to learn about your culture. We talk about cultural competence in therapy a lot because your counselor, they may know a lot about other people because there's a lot of research out there. Teach them about yourself and teach them where to find more information, kind of thing. So they can, they don't know everything. Not everybody knows everything. Sometimes they need your help.
And how do you recognize mental illness in others? How do you help them?
It's a tough one. This is a tough question. At least I
I
think so.
think at least with some of the symptoms that we shared, with the most common ones, anxiety, depression, and knowing that, stress, that's just something temporary, it's externalized. Separating that from anxiety. Anxiety is diagnosed and it takes a toll and it's for a prolonged period of time. So knowing if, you recognize that someone, for example, is quote unquote down for a long period of time, they're not themselves, and it's been more than 2 weeks, it's been months, then yes, you should be concerned, you should be looking out to try to, get them some help.
And helping them is not always an easy task, right? Like having to tell somebody, I think you should seek help. So first be open about your experiences and your struggles with them, and they may come around, which touches on other topics as well. And then also be very patient. Help them understand where you're coming from. If they have questions, answer them, and be patient with that person because it's hard to change somebody's mind about these things, especially if they don't know they have a problem.
And sometimes we have to look at where they're at and meet them there. So if they're more willing to talk to Akasha, for example, we do have some priests that have their counseling degrees. If they're willing to do that, sometimes faith works for people as a therapeutic method and as self-care.
How do you balance your mental wellness with that of your family? I'm not sure I understand this question.
So I'm imagining this if someone has a lot of maybe responsibilities and there's just a lot going on in the family, so how do you balance what's happening with the family versus their own self-care and wellness? I know someone wrote this question, but I hope
You
explain it.
translate it.
Yeah.
I find that this is very strange, but I find that humor works a lot with this kind of situation. So it's I know our families can drive us crazy. My family drives me crazy, regular, all of them. It's not just one; it's all of them. And so humor is one way that I tend to balance things. Understanding where they're coming from is big, because like I said, they don't know what we know. At some point, you kind of have to stop and say, I know more than my parents, and I know Assyrian parents hate that so much. But if they've done their job right, you should be smarter than your parents, and you should stop sometimes. I know more than they do. I should not be angry about this or fight about this. And another way is to say, I can take care of myself, and then still go back to my family. It's not one or the other. I don't know if you have any ideas on that. Okay.
What can we do as young Assyrians who want to normalize a focus on mental health, make this topic more approachable for our youth? I would say just raising more awareness, and this is a great event, starting with all of this. I think hopefully if you leave this presentation and this workshop, you're more open and willing to attend additional resources or events such as these. So I think it's just exposure and that psychoeducation that we mentioned earlier.
And being open. I know it worked a lot for me and my friends when one of us came out and said, I'm getting therapy. And then the next one did it, and then the next one did it, and then the next one did it. So out of my group of friends, I think we all got therapy at one point or another. And being open about these things really does normalize them. makes them a little less scary, and knowing that like, oh, someone else is also going through this with me. Talk about your experiences and share them, whether it's with family or friends.
She got it.
How to get cheap help? Can someone answer this? Do you remember sliding scales? And insurance. It's the best way for me to tell you.
A lot of times we forget that insurance includes counseling. So yes, just call your insurance, see if it covers it or not, and if not, there's sliding scale.
Yeah, your insurance will usually tell you which providers are covered. And there's a lot of community agencies, there's one called Turning Point, there's Northwestern Family Institute. You get student therapists, which is what we've both done before, and you think, oh, I don't want a student as my therapist. You want a student as your therapist. They are fresh out of school and they want to help. They don't have a million clients, so they can really, really focus on you, and they do a great, great job. And once they have their own practice, you can continue seeing them. So, are there any other questions that were not on there that are important that we can answer?
So there's like psychiatrists, therapists, and all that stuff. I don't remember if you answered it already, but if somebody just needs to talk to somebody that they don't want to talk to anybody personal, but talk to somebody and just let out whatever they want to let out, who do you think is the best person to go to in that situation?
Well, we're biased. We're gonna say counselors. We think we're the best.
Talk therapy.
But counselors are probably the best. Like I said, psychologists do more thorough assessments. We do about the same job. But I'm gonna say counselors because we're a little more in tune with the individual. We work a lot with a lot of different people. It's a master's, like I said, so it's also more affordable. So and what you do in therapy is up to you. That's one thing I cannot stress. I don't have the power in that room. You do. You choose what you want to talk about. You choose how far you want to go with this. You choose if you want to come in or not. You do most of the work. I'm just like a board. You bounce things off of me, and hopefully when it hits, it changes trajectory or something. You know what I'm saying?
So it's reaching that insight, really.
Right.
Yeah.
Because sometimes you can't process something unless you're kind of talking like out loud about it, right?
Right.
It is challenging. It's a difficult process. If a person cares about you in that room, they're going to challenge you and they're going to say, but what part did you play in this issue that you have with your girlfriend? Right, they're going to make you see every scope of the issue. So it is a lot of work, but it's yours. It's yours to do with what you want. Like I said, we don't have the power in that room, so you have to go in there with an open mind and a willingness to work hard.
Okay.
Counselors, LPC, what you're looking for.
How do you separate things that you hear from not bringing it back home?
It's difficult, so usually we'll have our own therapist, which is always nice. But I think you can talk about things in a more generalized way, like, I'll talk to Ramina, let's say, right? We have peers, and we say, we're having an issue with this client. If it's very resonating, can you please help me? Can you consult with me? It's not, I won't tell her who my client is, I won't tell her who this person is. The second thing is really enjoy the things in your life, so that's not your main focus. So spend time with your spouse, with your children, with your parents, with your friends, whatever it is. That self-care is very important for us as well. It's not just what we teach, it's what we have to practice. I can't teach you something if I don't practice it. I'm doing a bad job already. That works for me. I used to get into bed and we'd put on like 6 episodes of any sci-fi show we could find, me and my husband, and we just sit in bed eating popcorn, and that's my form of self-care, right? That always helped me. I don't know what helped you.
No, exactly, that self-care. And then I would say that was the biggest question we had as graduate students as we started our program. Like, oh, what do you mean? I won't talk to my husband about like whatever case, even if we're not mentioning names. Nope, you're not. It's confidential, and you're not taking it home. And then they teach all these self-care techniques. Something like, when you're driving home, turn off the music so that you're there, hold on to the steering wheel with both of your hands. Because sometimes we realize we're driving and we pass maybe like blocks and we're like, wait, what where am I now? What just happened? Because we're just so used to that routine, we're not that grounded. So, being grounded, that self-care and those techniques really help.
Yeah, like I said, sci-fi shows, like I'll watch 6 episodes and I'll be like, oh, I forgot what I did today.
Friends for me.
There you go. So it's really about you as a person and what works for you. Some people would like become tennis champions because that's what they did all their downtime. Like therapists would do that. They would like take up like the sport or go into the Olympics, or they have these really crazy hobbies that we think are like weird, but like they really do help you refocus and ground and do something for yourself. So, yeah.
How do you de-escalate an anxiety or panic attack, and what's the difference between those two?
A panic attack is full-blown panic, like you cannot breathe. It's a completely different disorder too. So it's not just these intrusive thoughts that keep coming, it's intrusive thoughts that lead to you not being able to breathe and almost what feels like a heart attack. And they come in episodes and they don't really just stop out of nowhere. It's not a one-time occurrence, it's recurrent.
It can come out of nowhere.
Right.
So that's why it's clinically diagnosed and it's a disorder.
Yeah.
So that's very different than just having like an anxiety attack.
Yeah. Where it's like you're just overwhelmed by thought. I know that when it gets to that point, we do kind of refer to psychiatry at that point to help with medication. That being said, breathing techniques do help. So you start hyperventilating during a panic attack. And so if you know how to go back to that breathing that the body scan was talking about, and it's actually taking longer, deeper breaths, that's a way to de-escalate. Another way to de-escalate is not to isolate yourself. So go to somebody and be like, I'm not doing okay right now. Like, I can't breathe. And usually touch helps. So a lot of times when you're in an airplane, you have like a lot of people have flying anxiety, like really bad. And another person will just touch them. They'll automatically calm down. So those are some of the techniques that I've seen that work. I don't know if you have any more.
It's just shifting that focus. So I know we did the body scan, but you asked about DBT. I think that's one thing that they work on, like shifting the focus. So whatever works for that person, I think it's very hard. It takes a lot of maybe therapy and counseling to find out what helps. But I remember from like one of my instructors who actually had panic disorder, and he mostly focused on just shifting like his physical attention to something. So like instead of, you're here in your head and it's the breathing, you're putting like pressure somewhere else, like maybe you're holding onto something or that feeling.
Right.
So
The
either
touch.
from external or it's you.
Or you going and focusing like
Yeah.
washing dishes or doing something particular. But I know touch helps a lot with all types of anxiety. And so when people say things like hug somebody, it really does work. And learning how to you're basically learning how to breathe again when you're having a panic attack. Because you're going from short, shallow breaths that are giving you too much of, what is it called, the other chemical that you release?
Carbon dioxide.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're getting too much of that, and that's what's making you feel lightheaded. You're going back to intaking a lot of oxygen, which makes you calm and releases all those like neurotransmitters that make you happy. That's what Eliana does, by the way. That's my baby. She hugs you when you feel better. That releases oxytocin, and it's like a happy hormone.
Or, that's why there's doc therapy as well. And a lot of schools now, since I work in schools, like we bring dogs and it just helps. It relieves that tension.
Do you think it's ever a bad idea to have like a professional reach out to the person without telling them like, hey, you should seek help? Because you never really know how they're going to respond to it when you tell them. It's obviously like a very difficult conversation to have.
Yes.
So like, do you have any examples of that? And like, or
not
do you think it's a bad idea?
unless the person is a child.
Okay.
Do we get that? And even then, we really, really push honesty and openness about stuff like this, because having an outsider do that just makes that person trust their surroundings less.
Okay.
Does that make sense? Like some person that I know that's in my circle that I'm supposed to trust called the therapist and told them to reach out to me. First, the therapist will not do it. I don't know, right? They will not do it. And then the only time, even with parents, they'll be like, oh, I think my kid needs therapy. They'll come in and I'm like, you need to bring your child and you need to be here. You we need to talk about this openly and honestly, because I'm not going to do anything like without basically their permission.
Yeah, with the exception of like, if it was like someone to
Mandated.
report mandated or it's, like self-harm or,
Yeah.
you know, if it's to that level.
Right, and even then, like, with like self-harm and hospitalization, getting counselors in there and social workers and psychiatrists, if the person doesn't cooperate, we wait until they do. It's a waiting game, and if somebody's not ready for therapy, therapy will not work. If someone is not open to therapy, therapy will not work. And most of the time, like she said, the first time you go in, you're a skeptic, right? It's strange. You're probably gonna have to find yourself another therapist that's a better fit for you, so.
So even in a situation like you don't know the person that well, like you don't know how they're gonna respond to it, is that still a situation where you think you should have an open conversation?
Maybe, do you know someone else that's close to them?
Um,
I'd probably go that route.
So I have an example. When I was in college, there was this kid that was in this students organization I was in, and he like exhibited some disturbing behavior. Yeah, it was disruptive. So, like, I didn't know him that well, so I don't want to like sit down with him and say, hey, maybe you should seek help.
Yeah, yeah, I would.
But so I did actually end up going like to the office of student whatever wellness, I forget what it was called, and I told him like you should maybe talk to this guy.
Yeah, unless, like you said, their behavior is disrupting other people, and there needs to be action, like an action needs to be taken, then the school can do that as like a disciplinary body. But as a therapist, we're
Yeah.
not the ones that reach out.
So it's different for schools, like for high schools, they have like a box where, you know, if someone's concerned about someone else, they can like
Right.
give us a tip and a name, but that's different, that's within school.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, but if you're talking about like you and one of your friends in here, I'm like, no. Like, but yeah, no, in that context, when someone's being disruptive, harmful is another one, when you're harming other people within your environment, then yeah, you go to the disciplinary body. But within therapy, like, if you put someone's phone number and I call them, they're like, I didn't put my phone number in there, it kind of goes against ethics. Yes.
I don't know how to word it, so sorry if I go on too long. But
By all means.
yeah, so I have the type of personality where I'm very optimistic and I try to help people, but in return I have very low self-esteem and I'm very critical on myself. And I do obtain a lot of positive reinforcement. So people do tell me, good job, you're doing great, you know. And I'm a very hard worker, but I'm never, ever heartily satisfied with the work that I do. And that causes me to be a lot more busier and kind of work harder and get a lot more stressed, lack of sleep. What practices or like what traits do you have for people who are very critical of themselves?
Well, like, we'll go back to like, you really need to do that for yourself. Because you're always going to get, a person can praise you as much as like, I can praise you all day and all night, but if you don't believe it, it's not going to work, right? So it's about being kind to yourself. That type of like, what you have is type of almost like, you're kind of anxious, right? I'm not going to say anxiety, you don't have an anxiety disorder. But you're kind of anxious because your mind is chronically moving, that's why you're not sleeping. And a lot of that has to do with, once again, staying in the here and now, getting to that why. Why do I have a need to bring everybody else up right now? What is it that makes me want to bring everybody else up that it almost takes a toll on me? And kind of asking yourself those questions, and you're so busy that I think sometimes you probably forget to check in with yourself. So, I don't know if that makes any sense at all.
It does.
Because I think a lot too, I'm a thinker, and so it's constantly trying to please everybody, right? Like I'm trying to please my family, I'm trying to please my friends, I'm trying to please my husband, and it's like that thing where it's like, wait, I'm not content right now. Why am I not content? I just spent all day making everybody else happy. So it's kind of about like, what's going to make me happy? And why do I have to have this need? What is it? Why is it? And what's triggering it? And it goes back down. So like, I'll share some personal stuff just to like, make you guys see. So like one of these things that happens in our community, I don't know if you felt this way, but is this need to be perfect as a woman. Especially like when you're stuck between two cultures. So you have to be a good girl, you gotta get married, you have to have kids, you should be educated, and you should shut the fuck up. Sorry, right? So I considered myself perfect, right? I did everything my parents told me to do, and so when shit would hit the fan or things would not go right, I'd have a really hard time. I'd have a mental break because why is this bad stuff happening to me? I did everything right. right? And that goes back to that like cognitive distortions, right? I did everything right. No, none of us are exempt from that. And so learning to kind of like get to the core of what causes these things for us, what pushes us to, like you're saying, I make everybody else happy. What is it? Mine is what I was taught. This is what I grew up with. And as you grow up, you learn like, I'm not exempt from anything because of the person that I am. So really for me, it was focusing on myself, and I hope maybe that'll help you a little bit. And realizing like, even my not so perfect things are pretty good. I like them, right? Yes.
Kind of just to add on to what you're saying, just because I feel like I've been kind of going through that where it's like I'm being nicer to myself. At first, it kind of feels like you're being selfish when you're trying to focus on yourself. You're not paying more attention to people around you. But like once you overcome that, it feels very good to like accept yourself, because then you'll be better able to help those around you when you're in a better mental state.
Exactly. It goes back to that mom, right? We were talking about, or the dad. It doesn't matter who it is. If you don't help yourself, you can't help your children. You cannot be a good parent if you're constantly stressed, if you're constantly sad. And then I forgot, there was a quote that said something like, if everyone's not mad about you changing, you're not changing correctly. You're not doing it right. Because everybody's used to you a certain way, right? So when you start to shift and you start to change, it starts to change the dynamics around you. So even though it's for the best, if you're not making somebody mad, you're probably not doing it right.
True.
So
I agree.
It's like learning to say no, right? When all you do is say yes to people around you.
I also want to add to that point only because I've been through it personally. I would say also maybe don't look at your accomplishments as like, don't judge yourself on your accomplishments. Learn to just look at yourself as like who you are and accept yourself as you are. Like I think your sheet with the strengths was really helpful because there were things on that I thought like, I would have never thought to like celebrate this about myself because I just thought
it's whatever,
this
right?
might have been even a weakness for me.
Right.
But learning to see it as a strength I think is powerful.
You're right, because we tend to judge ourselves on a checklist, right? Like we're talking about, I'm educated, I'm next, I shut up. And it's like, those are not really great things. Great things are a lot of times internal, right? So, but yeah, look at that why. Look at that why. Why am I doing this right now? Especially if it's not beneficial to myself.
There's actually like a why exercise that you can maybe Google or maybe we can share later on. Basically, you share that example and then I would ask you why, and then you would answer with another statement, and then using your statement I would ask another why question until we would get to that bottom, reason of why it is like this. So it's just changing that thought process, that cycle of, what you're experiencing. And it takes practice.
It takes time too.
Yeah.
Like within our program, we're required to do individual and group therapy within our peers. And they challenge us a lot, and they tell us to like look inward, and you really start to see yourself in different light. It's very challenging having someone tell you something about yourself that you don't even know. Like they look at me and they look, like one of them looked at me and said, you're a people pleaser, and you're never gonna be happy being like this in here. How did I not notice this about myself? And a stranger essentially noticed this, right? So it takes practice, it takes time, and you have to be patient with yourself. Patient, kind, like all the time. And it's the hardest thing in the world, right? Because we live in a cruel place. So was this actually helpful or like?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep.
Any more questions? I think it's your slide. Thanks.
So that basically sums it up. Thank you all for coming again. Again, this was hosted by ASA. We have a lot of our board members here. If you want to and some of our actual members, if you're interested in getting to know what other programs we have, events, we have some of our upcoming events over there. But you can come up to one of us. You can follow us on social media. We have a website. So any information you need, we got lots of places for you to go. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Emily.
And thank you for taking the time to make this presentation.
Anytime.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh yeah, we did not plagiarize.